All right. Well, hello, everyone. Olin Giles here with Why Christianity. I want to welcome you back. I am super excited to share with you tonight my guest. I know I say that every time I have someone on, but I really mean it tonight. I'm excited to have a good friend and a young man on. But before we get into it here, I want to remind you about the website radicaltruth.net. You can go there and find lots of resources and lots of news articles. Please go and check them out. And of course, we always welcome input and maybe video topic suggestions that you may have. Anything that you would like to encourage us with, please go on there and share that with us and take advantage of those resources that we have. As you know, the vast majority of my ministry is focused on Muslims. I have a heart for Muslims and want to see them come to the real Lord Jesus Christ and come to saving faith in Him. And I have been working with a group of students out at Appalachian State University and quickly learned about my friend Ethan. I'm going to go ahead and just bring him on. How are you, Ethan?
What's up, Olin? I'm doing great. What about you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on here. I know this is a busy time of the year and you have probably lots of schoolwork to do and
Yeah, just a
lots
couple of exams.
couple of exams.
Just a
No
couple, yeah.
problem though, right?
Nah, no problem. I really just want to say thank you for having me on this. This is like my first time ever doing something like this, so it's really kind of you to like just bless me with this opportunity. I'm really excited.
The blessing goes both ways, brother. When I talked to you on campus and you shared with me a little bit about your conversation with a Muslim, I was just so encouraged and so
Yeah,
excited for you. And I know that God's going to use you in a mighty way. And just wanted to have you on the show. And I immediately thought of it, and I didn't want to,
let's go.
I didn't want to pressure you to do it. But again, I'm
Mm,
grateful that you're taking the time to come on. All right.
thank
Well,
you.
so you've given me a few questions to ask you, and I looked through these earlier. I think they're excellent questions. And but before we get into these, maybe just a really brief summary of who you are, and share with us any kind of information that you want to about your degree at App State and what you plan on doing.
Yeah, of course. So, my name's Ethan. I'm a freshman at App State right now. I'm currently majoring in nutrition, and minoring in religious studies, but I don't really know if I'm gonna stick with that. Honestly, I could do wherever God takes me. But yeah, I came to know, like, fully know Jesus this year, even in January. I kind of realized that following Jesus was the truth earlier in my high school career, but never really like fully gave my life to following Jesus until this January. And then just since then, by the grace of God, I've just had the opportunity to like learn more than I ever have in my entire life this year, which has been so cool. I've gotten to learn about evangelizing, just the early church, which is so cool. If you've ever looked
Mhm.
into that, so cool. And just really like find like my true purpose, because when you do start to give your life to Jesus, you know your true purpose in life, and it's like nothing you've ever like experienced.
Amen.
So it's just been really great this year, especially like even having you, because I remember like asking God to like put people in my life that would be able to like guide me in the right direction with like even evangelizing, and he just like put you there and you're like an evangelist to Muslims specifically, which is something that I was doing at the time, which is so cool.
Yeah, that's
So yeah.
awesome.
Hmm.
Well, it's been an honor and a privilege to work with you and everybody else there.
Thank you.
It really has. And I pray that the Lord will give me more time and the availability that you guys deserve really on campus. So that's my
Yeah.
prayer. And I can relate to your comments too about purpose. I tell people often that I've never in my life have I had such a sense of purpose as what I have right
Hmm.
now, and that's just
That's so great.
As apologists, we don't talk a whole lot about feelings, probably, but I want to tell you what, that's the greatest feeling in the world, to know that you
Amen to
are
that.
right where God wants you to be, and what a joy it is to hear you say that. So let's get into it here. Tell us about, when did you first have a conversation with a Muslim, and how did it go?
Yeah, so it's a funny story actually. So, my senior year, so this like April or May, me and like my senior class, we're doing like a graduation walkthrough basically through the school for like actual graduation. And I don't know how it came up, but me and my one friend, I think we're just talking about like how I was starting to come to the faith. Like within the last 3 months, I just became Christian. And then so that's my like non-believer friend, I would say. And then my two Muslim friends come up and they're like, "So you're becoming a Christian now?" I didn't. They had no idea. That's like the first time hearing about it. So I had played football with one of them, and the other one I just knew. But they're like, "So you believe in Jesus? Like he's God? So he's a God man? He's man God?" And I'm like, "Yeah, fully God, fully man, exactly." And they were like, immediately started bashing on me. Like immediately they're like, so that's like not possible. God would never associate himself with his creation like that. And I'm like, well, I mean, God truly loves us. He wants to reconnect with us. I don't see why he couldn't. I don't know why you're limiting God to that. So then we proceed to go back and forth for like the next hour and a half over this entire, like in the middle of this graduation walkthrough. We're just going back and forth about like, because I didn't even know like how to apologize to Muslims at the time. So I'm
Right.
just like kind of going on the fly, just explaining what I know. And I didn't really know what I was doing. So I don't really know how it went. I just know that I left with lots of questions and like really not feeling like I had fulfilled my duty, I guess. So that's
Yeah.
what kind of like started my initial quest to learning how to actually talk to Muslims because I feel like I just didn't do very good that day because I was not prepared whatsoever. I had no idea what I was talking about. I just knew that I believed in Jesus and that he was the truth, nothing
Yeah.
really else.
Well,
So,
bravo to you. I mean, I think a lot of people are, paralyzed by fear, and therefore they don't say anything. And that's,
mhm,
that's how you grow. That's how you
right.
mature in your faith, and that's how you do better at evangelism and apologetics. Is you dive into it, and you're going to make some mistakes in the beginning, but you learn from those mistakes, and you don't waver. You don't waver from your faith. I mean, obviously, if there was some kind of good evidence that you know was convincing, then we should change our mind. But of course, you and I know that when it comes to the deity, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, these three things that Muslims disagree with us on, the evidence is overwhelming, and we'll get into that a little bit here in a moment. But
Yeah.
as you were talking there, I couldn't help but think too about one of the problems that we have with Christian Muslim dialogue is the fact that we talk past each other a lot of times. We don't really have these meaningful conversations, and I think we especially see this online. It's just so difficult to have real genuine conversation that's meaningful, and you're actually swapping ideas, and you're not attacking each other personally. So I know that was one of my struggles early on. When I first started talking to Muslims, I struggled with, you know, I just wanted to bulldoze in there, and destroy their faith. But I've grown since then,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that you have too. So tell us about how you might have grown, just through this experience of sharing your faith and interacting with Muslims.
Yeah, so first thing I'll say is like debating over text is never going to be a good thing. No one you will not make a single ounce of progress through debating your views over text. Now, phone calls in person, great. You can work with that. But that's
Yeah.
the first thing. It'll never work. I've tried. It's not going to work. But like if you just go into it with the mindset of looking for the truth and nothing else, you're gonna have the most meaningful conversation because you're like if you have your Muslim that you're talking with and just say like, listen, man, all I want is the truth. I don't care what it is. I'm only debating my side because I believe it's the truth. If Muhammad is right, if Muhammad spoke the truth, I'm going to hell as of right now. But if Jesus spoke the truth, Muslims are going to hell. So it's just one of us is right, one of us is wrong, and one of us has the truth. So as long as we're both willing to put our minds on the topic of looking for the truth and not just like arguing your point, like you said, you can have so much more meaningful conversations when you decide that that's your thought process going into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would add that this is why it's so important to equip your generation. I don't want to I don't want to get off on a tangent. You know,
You're good, bro.
attacking youth pastors. I was a youth pastor at one time, and to some
Mm.
degree, I still am. But the days of pizza parties and toilet paper games, and that's all well and good, but your generation really needs to be equipped to have these meaningful conversations with Muslims. And that's not to say that we can't have fun or we shouldn't be, joyful as Christians and doing things that, in church that are fun. But when it comes down to it, our role in the Great Commission is making disciples and equipping students and
Hmm.
people as a whole to do this kind of work. So, anything you want to add there? Any other additional thoughts or?
I mean, yeah, just like our calling is to, I forget who said it, but know God, make God known.
Mhm.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
especially like, if you just take time every day or every week to actually like growing in knowledge in some sort of way, whether that be like growing in the truth of what Muslims actually believe. Because there's a bunch of misconceptions, I believe. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions of what Christians actually believe. So if like, as long as you take time to like learn something every day, you're never going to stop learning. The second you stop learning is the second you start like dying, basically, because you're not
Yeah.
taking any new information. So just take time. Like, I would just recommend like, I know you do a bunch of reading, so I'm not talking to you specifically, but just anyone to just take time to learn something new every day, and you can grow in meaningful conversation with Muslims all the time for sure.
Yeah. Brother, I wish I'd been smart enough to do what you're doing right now. I graduated high school, just barely graduated, and I thought I was done with school. I spent 10 years of my life never read a book. And the moment I met
Wow,
Jesus Christ, I had this insatiable desire to learn and to grow, and I've never lost that.
yeah,
And so I do love to read, and
that's
I think,
great.
yeah, what you just said is so important that I would again would give anything to be able to go back and be as young as you are, and to to know what I know now and learn and grow and take advantage of all the opportunities that God has given me. But ultimately, we learn these things not to gain a bunch of head knowledge or not to impress other people. I think there's a tendency as apologists to think that I've got it all figured out. I got a master's degree in this and I got a master's degree in this, and you have all this knowledge, but ultimately, as we've been talking about, we want to take this and apply it to life. We want to have these conversations with Muslims. So maybe you could share with us just a little bit about how often you have conversations with Muslims, or how often do you come across them? I know there's a pretty active MSA or Muslim Student Association on campus, and maybe just share with us a little bit about how often you interact with them and how that plays out.
Yeah, so you were telling me like stories about how you would like go to mosques and like encounter Muslims in their own area like that. I think that's so sick, and I'd love to do that someday with you.
Yeah,
Just any ideas that you had. But as far as like, it's actually interesting. I haven't really met a Muslim on campus yet. I've only like me and those two guys I was talking about. We always just have these random like hour long, 2 hour long conversations on the phone, and like it's actually cool because we're both growing in knowledge, and it's kind of cool to see that over time. But that's like something like, as far as how often, it's just like once a month. I mean, me and these guys are just like going at it back and forth, And that it's really cool to see that though. But as far as in person, I haven't even encountered any other Muslims on campus, which I would love to do though. Like I feel like I'd be prepared enough to do that.
Yeah. So these are friends that you have back home. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So
Okay.
one of
I
them
didn't realize
I
that.
played football with. Yeah. So one of them I played football with like my senior year. So and the other one I've just been friends with over my high school career. But like I was friends with them before like I even knew they were Muslim before they even knew I was Christian. I always
Yeah.
respected them. So the friendship, honestly, like if when you're friends with someone beforehand, it makes it a lot easier to like actually have meaningful conversation, like you
Mm.
said, because you already have that respect basis before going into it. Because I feel like some people don't have that when you just start like
Yeah.
debating theological stuff. So the friendship's actually been a blessing, I think, for me with these two guys.
Amen. I would add to that that it's important that we stick with those friendships too. I think so many times it's easy to walk away from each other because we disagree, and we're not suggesting that you have these heated arguments with people who disagree with you like Muslims, but again, we've I think we've pretty plainly made it known that we're talking about a respectful, meaningful conversation where you exchange ideas. But again, even if you don't always agree, it's just so important that those friendships continue on. I think a lot of times Muslims need something tangible. They need to see the love of Christ in us, and that doesn't waver. God's not
Yeah,
gonna love somebody today and not love them tomorrow. And so, as we reflect
good.
that character and nature of God, it's important that we do the same. I think, and a lot of times it's just easy to walk away. But
Yeah, and that's what I love about Muslims. Like, whenever I'm like evangelizing or like trying to find people just randomly in the street, I never really know what I'm gonna come across. And like 99% of the time, people just you can't have meaningful conversation with them because they either don't want to, they
mm,
don't care, or they aren't like intellectually ready for that conversation. Like they haven't really gotten to the part of concluding that you're gonna die one day and you should
mm,
probably look into if there's a life after death. And that's not their fault. It's just
yeah,
it's that's why I love Muslims because they have that preparation intellectually. So they're ready to like have meaningful dialogue with you about like a meaningful, tangible thought idea. Because like these are like the most popular religions in the entire world. Like you can have amazing dialogue for these religions. That's what I love talking about Muslims with.
yeah. I often tell people that all you have to do is say, "What do you think about Jesus? What do you think about God?" The conversation is on. I mean, you can ask such a simple question to a Muslim, and you have be better prepared to listen and hear what they have to say. They're going to talk to you, and I've stood in the
Yeah,
rain for hours
I
talking
love
to them.
that.
Yeah, they love to talk about those two things, and as you said, you better you better be ready to respond with some evidence and giving some reasons why you believe what you believe. But on that note, what are some of the topics that they might bring up, or maybe some of the objections that you've encountered?
Yeah, so like the first, like I said, like the first thing they were bringing up was like, how can Jesus be fully God? God is so
Mhm.
above that. That was the first thing I remember. They often bring up the Trinity because it is a very hard topic to understand the Trinity of three persons, one God. But honestly, having specifically the Trinity conversation has helped me myself even understand the Trinity because the more I explain it, the better I think I comprehend it
Yeah,
intellectually. And then they'll bring up like the Council of Nicaea with how they made declarations of what the Trinity actually was and specific things like that, like making declarations about like theological topics, they find that concerning that they never would have thought of that beforehand, and that this is
yeah,
like the first time they bring up some topic like this, and so that's another one. Oh, but the two things that I found to talk about often is so they like to bring up uh contradictions
mm,
within the Bible, and it's always like they'll pull two random quotes, either in the Old Testament or quotes about Mary seeing Jesus first or someone else seeing Jesus
Yeah.
first. And it's always like I get it. Like if you find two conflicting verses that you don't really understand at first, you might find that contradicting. But as far as like the New Testament, you just have to look into a little bit of context to find what these verses are actually saying. Like with them bringing up these things, it's going to be pretty easy to understand that it's not about these verses being contradicting. It's just about the context. So like with the eyewitness thing, with Matthew or Mark, I don't know the exact verses, but whenever they talk about who sees Jesus first, different eyewitnesses are gonna say different things depending on what they saw, what they heard they saw,
Yes.
right? So like I know you probably heard this analogy, but like if there's like a car accident and there's different eyewitnesses, right? And like there's a police officer asking these people, "What did you see? What happened?" One person could be like, "Oh, I saw this car drive this way, and this guy got out." And then the other person could say, "Well, from my perspective, I saw this guy get out at this time." So it's almost like you have to put together the eyewitnesses to get the full story of what actually happened, which is
Mm.
what detectives do, like for I don't know mysteries and stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, but then it also gives more evidence that what they're saying is true. Because if you're going to have all these eyewitnesses and they were going to make something up, wouldn't you think that they would try to align all of their beliefs to like to say the exact same thing at the exact same time to make it a more believable story? Because if they're going to make that up, that's going to be pretty obvious that they wouldn't contradict with different eyewitnesses. It's going to be the truthful because of how it is, the truthful eyewitnesses that genuinely are just Matthew and John quoting what they had seen or claimed to have seen. And that's something that I love explaining, but sometimes unfortunately they won't really see eye to eye on that. They're gonna want like one definitive example of what happens when it happens, which is what they like about the Quran. Like, one Quran supposedly, same over time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I've actually had that encounter before. I was back years and years ago. They used to have, this place where you could write in the newspaper, and I got to having this conversation, pretty much like what you just described, with this lady, and I used the illustration about the car accident. And you're right. If three people got together, three independent witnesses, and they all had the exact same story, word for word almost, it would be rather suspicious,
Yeah.
to
Hmm.
think that, it suggests that they all got together and come up with this story. But the fact that we have, four gospels from four different perspectives, and really, written to different groups of people, this is actually good evidence that the authors didn't get together and make up this story, but they each spoke and gave their own perspective. And a lot of these supposed contradictions are simply that they're just somebody else's perspective. Was there one angel or two angels? Nowhere does it
Hmm.
say there was only one angel. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just again how they perceive what they witness. So
Right.
that's excellent. And to add to what you were saying about the Trinity, I started to skip over that, but I think that that's huge. And this is a
It is.
doctrine that we don't talk a lot about in the church today, because it is kind of complicated to most people, and people may struggle trying to understand it. But would you really expect to be able to fully grasp and understand who an infinite God is? I mean, is that something that we should really expect? I don't think so. But in comparison to, the Allah of the Quran, he's a what you might call a Unitarian God. So he's one in being, one in persons. I like to maybe start a conversation with them about the fact that God is love. If you look at all the things that really we value in relationships, we would say that love, righteousness, and even the ability to speak to each other all of those things are important to us as human beings made in the image of God. But from an Islamic perspective, Allah has to change in order to love. He depends on creation in order to love.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll ask them, who was Allah loving before he created?
Yeah.
So he has to change in order to love. He has to change in order to speak. He has to change in order to act in a righteous way. These are all signs of a false God. A God that changes is no God at all.
Right. And
And I
actually, I
think,
brought this up to my Muslim friends, and like I said, this is something that I brought up over text and got nowhere. So this is like a prime example of when you actually have a valid point, don't just like spew it out and just expect something crazy. Like, you have to like build up a genuine claim like what you just did and present it in a intellectual way so that they understand it. But
yeah,
they were just like, God is outside of our understanding. We don't have to understand what he does. But this is like you said, if their God is changing, that's something that you should seriously consider being an example of a false God for sure.
yeah. Yeah, they hold to this idea of an utterly transcendent and unknowable God, basically, but yet they know he can't have a son. He can't be multi-personal. It is they're dogmatic about some of the things that he can do as far as contradicting himself. He can love and love not. He can act in a way that is good. He can act in a way that is evil. He can do these contradictory things, but he cannot have a son. He
Yeah.
cannot enter into his creation.
Mhm.
It's really interesting to me the things that that they're kind of dogmatic about, and they will you know I want to say they're kind of hypocritical about, because they believe that he can bring about good and evil, but he can't do this simple thing like enter his own creation. It just shows their Islamic bias, I think. But anyhow, any additional thoughts that you have there?
What was the initial question again?
We talked about the Trinity, and talked about
Oh,
how
right, right.
the
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
contradiction. Yeah.
So with I would say 99% of all Muslims will claim the Bible has been changed over time.
Mm,
And so you're not really going to be able to like explain without knowing the actual history of the Bible, like what that actually means and how they're wrong. So like I'm not going to like explain how to defend that, but I would just all you have to do is just really if you can explain the early church and explain the process that the Bible went through to become as it is, and how we have thousands of manuscripts from the first and second centuries of like still today, even though like we don't have the exact words that Matthew wrote down, we have copyists uh scribe back in the day, like not everyone could read or write. So if someone were to copy a text, right, you would
yeah.
you would pay a scribe to literally copy the text word for word. Like that was something that like was a job back then because no one could read or write as often as we could. So you look at like the authenticity of stuff like that, and then how we genuinely have manuscripts dating back so incredibly early, and then as well as like the early church fathers, like the fourth pope of I don't even remember the when he wrote some letter quoting how faith in the Lord Jesus Christ brings about salvation. If the Bible lost its original meaning, why would he be saying that? If he
Yeah.
was part of the original church, why is he saying what's in alignment with the Bible we have 2,000 years later? It's because the Bible we have is so incredibly reliable to what it was back in the day. So just yeah, like looking into random quotes from early church fathers is going to be so beneficial for stuff like that.
Yeah. We have, I know you're well aware of this, and probably our listeners are as well, but we have an abundance of manuscripts, and I have this replica here of what's known as the John Ryland fragment. It's
Dang.
a fragment of John 18, and it's basically word
Wow.
for word. By the way, a second century fragment of the Gospel of John,
How much did that cost, bro?
and it's
How did you get
basically
that?
word for word what we have in our Bibles today. it tells us this was a codex too, by the way, because it has writing on the front and the back, which tells us it's not a scroll. It's in this early book form, which the Christians pretty much brought about. So what an incredible find that we have
Is.
here in this. I mean, this is just a replica. It's made on actual papyrus reed, but we have 56 over 5600 Greek New Testament manuscripts. We could talk about Latin and Coptic. We have close to 25,000 manuscripts that predate the printing press. And so we're able to take these manuscripts and examine them. Sure, there are some spelling variants in them, but doctrinally, they are 99.9% accurate. So before Muhammad ever existed, and after Muhammad, after Muhammad in 7th century Islam, we have this abundance of manuscript evidence that supports our view of Jesus Christ, our view of the gospel. And it's a huge problem for Muslims and Islam. So
Mhm.
I know you're fully aware of that. Yes, I saw you just wrote a paper you were sharing with us.
Oh yeah, I need
Yeah.
to. But after this call, I need to finish that paper. By the way,
Okay.
it's due
All
at
right.
11:59 tonight. Nah, we don't have to hurry. It's just I got something I gotta do after this.
All right.
But I
We'll
was
wind it
clicking with
down
that
here.
paper. Ah, you're good.
And if you want to skip this question, you just let me know. But what are some of the best and worst methods that you found when working with Muslims or talking with them?
Yeah, so I know we were talking like theologically with like problems with Allah being all loving, stuff like that.
Mm,
But really the most leeway you're gonna have is uh talking about the resurrection and the early church. If you focus on those two things, you can't like dispute like evidence of historical stuff like that. Like you
mm.
can't dispute the fact that all of the disciples were martyred for their faith, other than obviously Judas. But you've every single disciple willing to die for their claim to have seen, not even their belief that they saw Jesus resurrected, but their claim to have actually seen him physically resurrected from the dead. Then we have Paul having a radical encounter, killing thousands of Christians, and then all of a sudden changing his ways to become the writer of the New Testament, a majority of the New
Yeah, yeah.
Testament. Like you can't like that's not something you can argue with. These are like concrete facts. Like why would they be willing to die for that claim? Why would Paul have changed his ways so drastically? Why would he have become a significant part in the church becoming actually large in Rome? Like these are just things that like Muslims would have to answer that they really can't find an answer to. Like another reason outside of the fact that maybe he actually did what the apostles are claiming to be. And at the fundamental like the fundamentals of Christianity versus Muslim is you have eyewitnesses of Jesus contradicting what a man says about him 600 years later.
Yeah.
So if who why would just fundamentally like thinking about this, why would you take the what the guy 600 years later says about Jesus? It doesn't like logically make sense. Just if you get to the basis of it. But like as far as like because I no matter like for the 4 hours of conversation that I would have like in one night with my Muslim friends, I wouldn't get anywhere other than when I brought up Paul, other than when I brought up the book of Acts, when I brought up the letters of Paul that he wrote to the churches. Those are the like the pieces of evidence that I've found to be the most influential in making actual meaningful progress with talking to Muslims. And I'm sure you have your own methodology, but I'd love to hear like what you also have felt to be the most meaningful as well.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, Muslims love to attack the Apostle Paul, but he gives us some of the best evidence that there is for Christianity. I mean, there's a lot that could be said there. 1 Corinthians 15 contains an early creed
Right.
that a creed is basically a doctrinal statement. You want to know what the early church believed, you look at these doctrinal statements, these creeds. So, I mean, even atheist and agnostic scholars would say that this creed dates really early. Christian scholars date it to within months of the cross. The late atheist scholar Gerd Ludemann dates it to within 2 to 3 years of the cross. He says no more than 3 years. So, there's a lot more that could be said there. Philippians 2 contains an early hymn. They're singing this song to Christ, which is basically about his two natures. Although he existed in the form of God, he emptied himself and took on the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of men. So you have two forms there: the form of God and the form of man. And this is what the early church is singing about. This is their praise and worship songs. So lots of early creeds that could be mentioned, but Paul gives us some of the best evidence that there is, and I think that's one of the reasons why Muslims love to attack him. But anything you want to add to that, or no
I
pressure? I
was
just thought you were getting ready to say something.
no. That's okay.
Okay,
You can keep going.
all right. Well, tell me about what's your favorite part about talking with Muslims. I mean, you seem to enjoy it. I know that I do. So what's your
Yeah.
favorite part?
I really, I just really like respect and appreciate their just first of all their respect for Jesus, and then their genuineness in being faithful to something. Because like I said earlier, like people that you want to have conversations with and they don't want to, they're living for themselves really. Like
Mm,
atheists, they have a God. It's just they're their own God. They're faithful to
right.
themselves. Um, so that's why I do really love talking with Muslims because you can have such an intellectual talk and like a meaningful conversation that like we're both going to benefit from talking about the God of the universe, the true nature of the God of the universe. Like where can you go wrong with trying to find the truth in that? That's what I
Right.
like. It's just so cool like talking with someone that actually respects your point of view even though they have their own disagreeing views. It's just because they actually acknowledge Jesus was a real person. He said and did real things. Um, it's really cool having someone actually like agree with the basis of beliefs and stuff like that.
Yeah. That's that does take away some of the early steps. I mean, if you're dealing with somebody who already believes in God, they already believe in one God, and they
Yeah,
already believe that Jesus was a real historical person who actually existed. And it's interesting that he's called the Messiah. He's born of a virgin, but and even performed miracles, including raising people from the dead. But he's not the divine Son of God. He didn't, die a substitutionary death on the cross, and therefore he didn't resurrect from the dead either. So, Islam gets as close as possible to the truth while still remaining a lie. You've heard me say that before, but
yeah,
it just makes a very powerful lie that we have to, somehow show our Muslims that, or our Muslim friends that they are deceived about who Jesus is. Even though they believe in Jesus, even though they believe in God, they believe in a false God and a false Jesus, and we have to bring them, lovingly and gently and respectfully over to the real Jesus, and sometimes that's just a real challenge. Uh,
right.
what are some of the struggles that you might have when debating Muslims? You mind sharing some of those with us?
Yeah, whenever like because when you're like talking with a Muslim and like let's say like they like bring up a valid point like I for times in the past where I haven't like had the knowledge to answer a question on the spot like sometimes I just be like I don't know bro I'm gonna be honest I really don't know that one because I think that's just the best thing I feel like we talked about that at Ratio Christi a
Yeah,
couple weeks ago like you just gotta be honest and be like I would love to like look into that for you and just be honest to say I don't know at the moment. But that is definitely something that I've had to struggle with because I'm trying to like make up an answer like on the spot. That's never gonna go well because then they'll like pick that apart so
yeah,
easily. So just being honest was a struggle for me at first, but I think I've gotten better at that over time. What's been like kind of I know you've had like a bunch of experience debating Muslims. Has there been like one thing that you struggle with even, or have you been like pretty good with like growing in that over time?
Well, I'm like you. I really like the historical arguments, and we've talked a lot about evidence, for Paul, and we're into this apologetics type thing. And I recently debated this Muslim, and I spent my opening statements giving, these uh, this solid evidential reasons why you should follow Jesus Christ. And then out of the blue, he's just like, I haven't even given or presented any kind of evidence. And he starts talking about, Jesus um, accusing, a young man of being demon possessed who actually was struggling with epilepsy. And so that kind of caught me off guard. I didn't see that coming. I didn't expect him to, to
Yeah,
present this argument. It was kind of like a Bible contradiction, but it wasn't really, a Bible contradiction, but it was kind of off the wall thing. And it caught me off guard. I'm not going to lie to you,
yeah,
but sometimes they're not really looking for evidence. They're not really interested in presenting evidence. They're more interested in, catching you off guard, or, presenting these rhetorical arguments that, sometimes are even really harsh and belittling to our faith. But
hmm
I guess that would be my struggle with how do I respond to something like that in a loving way? And
yeah. And that's what like Muslims are taught though.
yeah,
Like when you go to like I think you mentioned like when Muslims go to the mosque or they learn about their faith, they're literally every single one is given a reasoning to defend Islam. They're all given like their own arguments to use against Christianity, and that's where Christianity fails to do so as well as they like. I would say Christianity isn't very good at teaching Christians why or how they can explain why they're Christian compared to Islam. I think Islam does a much better job of that
yeah.
in in teaching because the average Christian, I would doubt be able to explain why they believe in Jesus. Like they're most likely just going to give a feelings based answer
Mhm.
and not like an actual evidence based answer. So I do with Muslims I do think that that's something that they do a lot better than Christians as far as just defending their faith. And then on top of that I do another thing would say I would struggle with is sometimes I'm almost like too too like I don't know, not scared, but like I don't like make a point, you know, like I don't like make like a good enough point to like actually be able to like refute something, you know, like I don't like actually say something that contradicts. I'm almost too scared of like not upsetting their viewpoints, just like maybe saying something they've already heard a million times, and they're just gonna be like, "Oh, this guy again saying the same stuff." So
Yeah.
I want to say something in like a new perspective. Like I want to like, get them to understand the Trinity in a new way. I want to get them to understand Jesus in a new way. So like, I don't know, just like making like firm, concrete points has been something I've struggled with as well. I think.
I think that'll come with time, and I try to tell people, unless you have a really really close relationship with a Muslim, I try to avoid talking about Muhammad. A lot of Christians today,
Mm-hmm.
want to attack Muhammad and call him certain names, and they're very offended by that, and so you create this emotional barrier from the get go that really keeps them from thinking about who Jesus really is and who Muhammad was. So I like to talk about God, and I like to talk about the Quran versus the Bible. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about Muhammad, but I think we should be very careful about how we do that. At some point, we're going to have to confront who he is and some of the things that he's done. But this is certainly not something that we want to do immediately. We don't want
Right.
to we don't want to go out of our way to offend them, and that's exactly what it does. I mean, even drawing a picture of Muhammad is offensive to them. So
Mm.
if we can just avoid these emotional barriers and try to begin with something that's more productive, that's my approach.
Right. And like I was talking about, like as long as you both are like on the same level of I just want the truth. I just want
Yeah.
to know the truth. I think that would come a lot more naturally than just trying to come at the other person and just refute all their points with a simple explanation. And but
Yeah, and
that's
to
what I
go
would
back
say.
to what you said too about the church, we've got to do a much better job of helping
Right.
people understand why they believe what they believe. This is, the fact that we're not doing it is on us. I mean, the Bible
Mhm.
clearly tells us in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be ready to give an answer, an apologia. Apologia was a legal term like what's used in a first century court of law. Always be ready to give a rational defense for why you have hope in Jesus Christ. So we're
Yeah.
commanded to do this as Christians, but we're not. I mean, I've had conversations with boys, middle school Muslim boys who the average Christian couldn't handle. I mean, the
Wow.
average adult Christian couldn't
So
handle
that's
their
just
objection.
crazy.
Yeah, they're like you said, they're prepared and they have, they've invested time in their young people and they've taught them how to respond to some of these things that we're saying and some of the things that the Bible teaches. And we have got to take note and stand up and start doing what God has called us to do. And I know
Hmm.
you're aware of that, and probably most of our listeners are as well.
Yeah.
But to me, this is if I had to do youth ministry all over again, that would be a major part of my youth ministry, and it was
Mm.
at at one time a part of my youth ministry, but I don't know that it was, something that we focused on enough.
Yeah. And I would argue when Jesus says, "Love your neighbor as I have loved you," this is a part of loving, is it not? Like when
Amen.
like love isn't just like if you have like a son, loving your son isn't just like giving him everything he wants to make him happy, as happy as you can. No, you love him by doing things, telling him things that he probably won't like, but you know will be better for them. So
Yeah.
when you're talking to people, to non-believers, you're gonna say things that they don't like. Obviously, that there is a God, Jesus is that God, and you're not doing it to make them feel good. You're doing it because you know this is this is in their best interest to
Yeah.
hear this aspect, something that they don't really hear about. Jesus, who's this Jesus guy? You're loving them by bringing up this topic and explaining to them the truth of who Jesus really is. Because if God is loving to us in that he gives us his revelation of truth, we should do the same thing by giving other people the revelation of truth just in a way they understand. Some people may not come to the revelation of truth through a logical debate. Some people may come to the revelation of truth by asking God to give them a vision, give them a dream,
Mm.
give them the feeling of their the hole in their heart being filled. Like it's going to be a more feelings based argument,
Yeah.
whereas like some people are going to need like a logical debate of why God exists, and that's just it's a person to person basis, and that's why God speaks to each person differently. I would argue, and how we should also present the case for Christ to each person based on where they're at and what they need to hear at the time.
Amen. That'll preach. Most loving thing that you can do. The most
Amen. Yeah.
loving thing that any Christian can do to a Muslim is correct them gently and respectfully,
Right.
show them who Jesus really is. I mean, that's their problem. They don't know Jesus Christ. They haven't put their faith in Him, and so the the sobering thought is that God has chosen to work in and through us to bring them to Christ. I mean, He's doing it on His own, and obviously doesn't need us. As you said, He's you know thousands and thousands upon thousands of Muslims are coming to Christ through visions and dreams.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about these dreams is that they're not encountering the Isa of the Quran, but they're encountering the Jesus of the Bible. And therefore, after they have these dreams, they're looking for Christians. They're looking for people just
Yeah.
like you and me to have a conversation with. So
That's
so
good.
important that we're ready to respond and speak the truth to them. And again, that's the most loving thing that we could possibly do.
Yeah.
Um, one final question that I have for you in closing: is there any advice that you would have or want to give to someone that's looking into evangelizing Muslims, or maybe they have a Muslim friend and they want to get into this conversation about who Jesus really is, but what advice would you give them?
Yeah, so first, pray. My friend
Mhm.
Andrew, whenever like I come to him with a problem or asking for advice, the first thing he always says is pray. And I hate it, but he's right. You should definitely pray. Because like if you're doing something like you can evangelize for the glory of yourself because you're prideful and want to be right to
Mhm.
Muslims. Like you can come at this with the wrong heart posture. I think firstly, praying and aligning yourself excuse me, with God is going to be the first and best thing you should do. So by first aligning your heart posture, being able to then see that this is something that God actually wants you to do, then just literally take in as much information as you possibly can, but in a smart way. Don't just go and
Yeah.
watch theological YouTube videos like in your bed and just like lay down mindlessly watching these videos. No, like actually look up genuine theological arguments between the God of Allah and the God of Christianity and write down what you find. Write down the argument. Write down what actually makes sense to you so that you can remember it and refute that point to Muslims and that you're not just like spewing information out of your mouth because you've heard someone else say it. So just praying, taking in information, and then just like experience. You're not gonna like learn how to actually talk with a Muslim if you've never talked with a Muslim before. You have to put yourself in the battlefield. You have to go out there and eventually have those hard, like gritty talks with Muslims, and you're gonna probably suck at first, but over time you're gonna okay, I've heard this before, I know what to say to this. But it really just comes down to the heart posture
Mhm.
and what you really want to get out of talking with Muslims. Like for me, the only reason I talk to Muslims is because I feel like they're so close to the truth, like you said.
Yeah.
They're led astray by a little bit. And imagine like you're a Muslim and you're standing at the gates of heaven, and God is like, I've given you my son Jesus to look at, and you've perverted his image to
Mhm.
something he is not. And you lived your entire life not coming to this understanding because no Christian has really laid it out for you in a easier way to understand. Did the work for you. No one's really prayed for you. No one's really done this stuff for you. But then you have us as Christians the opportunity to change the eternal life of someone's outcome,
Mhm.
of someone's like the rest, basically the rest of someone's life. You can change if you spend your whole life evangelizing and you only save one person, that's more worth it than not doing any
Yeah.
evangelizing at all. So I think that your heart posture and why you want to evangelize is the first thing you should get right with God because if you don't have that, you're not going to make any progress.
Yeah. I think a lot of Christians, it's so tempting for us to use prayer as an excuse. Um,
Yeah.
well, I've got three Muslims that I met. Well, I'm going to pray that they come to know the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm going to pray for them. Well, I hope that you do, but we want to pray that the Lord would help us to do what He's called us to do. I think that's one of the major um, themes in prayer. We want to get on the same page as our Lord is on. We want to love these people like He does. We want to follow His methods, but then we have to actually go out and respond in obedience and do what He's called us to do. And sometimes it's just easy, to pray for them and forget about it. But
Yeah.
that's
And I would
that's
want
only
to ask you something about like prayer. Like I've always wondered like how in regards to like me praying for the salvation of a Muslim, how would you say like my prayer or like my will can influence God's timing and God's will? Do you see what I'm saying? Like it almost feels like to me like praying for like the salvation of a human being
yeah.
or for like the change of a mind of a Muslim. Like I don't fully understand like the my ability to impact God's will to actually move in his life. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't think that it actually does. I think it's more of a fact that God has chosen to involve us in His work. Again, what a sobering thought. I mean, God's going to bring these people to saving faith in His Son, regardless. He's gonna use somebody. He's gonna come to them in a dream or a vision. He's going to, put the word of God in front of them. He's going to draw them to himself, convict them of their sins. He's going to do his part. And I don't think it's so much that our prayer changes the will of God as it is putting us on the same page as God is on. God has chosen to involve us in his work, and that means first and foremost that we go to him. Lord, is the timing right? Should I talk to this Muslim today about
Mm.
Christ? Should I respond to this question that he has? And Lord, help me to know how to respond appropriately. Help me to respond in a way that honors your spirit and your word. So I think it's more for our benefit than it is, something that actually changes the will of God.
Okay.
I don't think it changes the will of God at all. I think it's just the simple fact that he has chosen to involve us in his work. And what an incredible thought. I mean, to think that you and I are going to step off into eternity one day and we're going to encounter people who are there in paradise, in heaven, with the Lord Jesus Christ because the Holy Spirit worked in and through us to bring them to saving faith. That's
So
a
beautiful.
pretty deep thought right there, my friend. And
Yeah.
I think we're not going to be judged so much on what we didn't do as we're going to be judged on what we could have done. And so God has given us this glorious message, the gospel. He's called us to interact with these people. He's called us to prepare ourselves and to prepare the church to respond in a way that answers their questions. And, we just leave the results to him. But again, just a pretty amazing thought to know that we're going to in some way impact eternity.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything greater than showing the love of Jesus to another human being, and then on top of that, spreading the gospel to that human being. Because like,
Yeah,
what else in this life is going to benefit us other than growing with God? It's going to be
amen.
bringing people. You can't bring anything with you to heaven. You can bring yourself. You can bring other people, and that's
Yeah,
it. I
that's
think
right.
that's so good though. Like I love thinking about how us aligning our will with God's will can save souls. That's
Yeah,
that's got to be some motivation to get out of bed and evangelize, if anything.
God desires all men to come to. God desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And so
Mm.
should we. Um, it's just a privilege to be a co-laborer with Him and to know that He can use any of us. You don't have to be anybody special, but God can use you just as you are. I think we should strive to grow and mature in our faith, and we should do everything that we possibly can to answer these Muslims' objections. But we certainly shouldn't be paralyzed by fear. And the Lord is with us. Jesus said, "I'll be with you even to the end of the age."
That's
So
so good.
anyhow, I'm going to let you get back to your paper. We're approaching the hour mark here, and I do
Cool.
not want to be the one to cause you problems on this paper, brother. I want you to know I'm going to be praying for you as soon as we're done
Thank you.
here. And it's been a great honor and privilege to have you on, Ethan. You are such a blessing to me in more ways than one, just as the other students at App State are. And
Yeah. Thank you so much, Olin. It's been a great experience. This is awesome. I would love to do this as much as you're willing to. This is so great.
yeah, maybe you need to start a YouTube channel. That's what you need to do. Maybe
Hey, I've
maybe
always been
after
talking
you
about starting a
graduate.
podcast. Yeah, after I graduate. Less
You got
papers to write, more time to make a podcast.
yeah. All right, brother.
Yeah.
Well, bless you again. Thank you so much, and you did a great job.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate
Take
it.
care.
Have a good one, Olin.
You too. Bye bye.